At 88 years old, Robert Redford still stands tall as one of Hollywood's most respected icons. Actor, director, producer, a man who built a career on integrity and raw talent. But behind the charm and that famous golden boy image lies a different story. A story of tension, of clashes, of broken bonds with some of the biggest names in the industry. So, who are the 7 stars Redford just couldn't stand? And what really turned admiration into resentment? Let's dive in. Number 7, Deborah Winger. Sometimes the fiercest rivalries don't start with hatred. They start with chemistry. That was the case when Robert Redford met Deborah Winger on set. From day one, sparks flew, but not the romantic kind. Their personalities clashed. Their working styles couldn't have been more different. Redford was calm, precise, a perfectionist. Winger was fiery, unpredictable, raw. Instead of blending, they collided. The set was tense. Crew members whispered about their constant disagreements. And then, something strange happened. That tension flipped. The very energy that made them fight began pulling them together. Suddenly, Hollywood's golden boy and one of its most volatile rising stars were romantically linked. But this was no fairy tale. Their romance burned hot and burned out fast. Winger left Redford just as abruptly as she had fallen for him. And to make matters worse, she left for Timothy Hutton. Not just another actor, one of Redford's friends. For Redford, it wasn't just heartbreak. It was betrayal, personal and professional. Imagine being blindsided, watching someone you trusted walk away with a piece of your inner circle. The wound cut deep. When Winger later married Hutton and started a family, the pain only grew sharper. For Redford, the betrayal wasn't just a moment. It was a scar that hardened into lasting dislike. Their story is a reminder of just how messy Hollywood relationships can get. On screen, it looks. That line came with Woody Allen. The two men were Hollywood powerhouses in their own right. Allen, the neurotic New Yorker, adored by critics for his sharp wit and quirky films. Redford, the all-American golden boy, admired for his integrity and subtle intensity. On paper, they could have been allies. In reality, couldn't have been further apart. The story goes that Redford once shared a table with Allen, but instead of a friendly chat, the exchange turned sour. No shouting match, no public blow-up, just an interaction so unpleasant that Redford stood up and walked away. Not from the table, from Woody Allen entirely. He never sat with him again. Never tried to mend fences. That single moment was enough to seal Redford's opinion for life. And Redford didn't just distance himself socially. He also refused professionally. In the 1980s, Allen offered Redford the chance to star in one of his films, a dream. It was Allen himself. Redford had seen enough to know what he didn't want. In his eyes, Allen wasn't a director who built trust. He wasn't someone who created safe, collaborative sets. Instead, Redford believed Allen thrived on discomfort, pushing actors into corners, forcing awkwardness, and manipulating rather than guiding. That was the complete opposite of Redford's philosophy. He valued respect, teamwork, an environment where talent could flourish. For him, Woody Allen represented everything toxic about Hollywood. And unlike so many who tolerate bad behavior for the sake of a career boost, Redford made a choice. He walked away, permanently. That decision might have cost him roles, but it protected something more important, his principles. And it cemented Woody Allen as one of the few names Robert Redford simply could not stand. Number 5, Marlon Brando. Working alongside a legend is supposed to be inspiring, but for Robert Redford, His time with Marlon Brando was the opposite. It was heartbreaking. The year was 1966. The film was The Chase. Redford was still carving out his career. Brando, meanwhile, was already an icon, the brooding genius who had changed acting forever. Redford arrived on set expecting to learn. It was painful to watch. Here was a man with once-in-a-generation talent, seemingly wasting it before the cameras. Instead of inspiring his co-stars, Brando radiated. Couldn't respect someone who, in his view, refused to honor the craft. It left him uncomfortable, even bitter. Years later, long after Brando's career had become a roller coaster of brilliance and chaos, Redford still remembered those days on The Chase, not with fond nostalgia, but with disappointment that never quite faded. To him, Brando was a tragic figure, not because he lacked talent, but because he squandered it. And for Redford, a man who built his legacy on discipline and integrity, that waste was almost unforgivable. So while audiences may forever celebrate Marlon Brando as one of the greatest to ever do it, for Robert Redford, the memory is different. It isn't about the genius. It's about watching a legend fall apart right in front of him. Number 4, James McAvoy. Not all conflicts in Hollywood come from egos or betrayals. Sometimes they come from something much harder to fix: artistic differences. When Robert Redford worked with James McAvoy, it seemed like a perfect pairing on paper. McAvoy was young, magnetic, and one of the most respected actors of his generation. Redford, the seasoned legend, now directing with decades of experience under his belt. McAvoy admired Redford immensely, but admiration doesn't always translate into chemistry. From the start, Redford had a very specific vision. He wanted restraint, quiet intensity, that subtle, naturalistic performance style that had defined his own career. But McAvoy was wired differently. His strength was in energy, emotion, and bold choices. Where Redford valued stillness, McAvoy thrived in movement. Two different acting philosophies colliding on the same set. And Redford, he was a perfectionist. He didn't just want good, he wanted exact. When McAvoy couldn't mold himself into the character Redford had imagined, frustration began to build. McAvoy later admitted that he felt Redford didn't quite know how to pull the performance out of him. That gap created a wall between them, not shouting, not open hostility, but a quiet disconnection that everyone on set could feel. Redford, disappointed. McAvoy, feeling like he'd let down a hero. For Redford, it was one more example of how difficult it could be to direct younger actors who didn't share his approach. For McAvoy, it was a painful lesson in trying and failing to meet the expectations of a living legend. The end result? The film was made. The work was done. But neither walked away satisfied. And in Redford's mind, James McAvoy became yet another name on the list of actors he simply could not connect with. Number 3, Barbra Streisand. On screen, The Way We Were looked like pure movie magic. Robert Redford, the ultimate golden boy. Barbra Streisand, the powerhouse diva with a voice that could stop traffic. The chemistry? Unforgettable. The film? A classic. But behind the curtain, it was a very different story. Redford wasn't sold on the idea of working with Streisand at all. Why? He didn't see her as the kind of serious actress he gravitated toward. Redford valued restraint, authenticity, understatement. Streisand, on the other hand, was bold, dramatic, the center of attention. It wasn't that Redford's talent, far from it. He simply believed their styles were oil and water, And he feared exactly what ended up happening. That her star power, but act wasn't the only issue. Redford had also heard that Streisand liked to control not only her performance, but everyone else's too. She had a habit of shaping the scene and influencing others. For a man like Redford, who believed in collaboration, balance, and subtlety, this was a red flag the size of a movie poster. And then came the personal tension. It's been reported that Streisand developed a very real infatuation with her co-star. Charming? Maybe for some. But for Redford, it was uncomfortable. So uncomfortable that he allegedly took precautions on set, wearing 2 pairs of underwear just to feel protected from her flirtations. Experience confirmed his fears. Yes, they made a classic together. But the behind-the-scenes discomfort meant it was a partnership he never wanted to repeat. So while fans still swoon over The Way We Were, Redford himself remembers it less as a romance, and more as a lesson in just how difficult it can be to work with a star who shines a little too brightly. Number 2. Steven Soderbergh. Not every grudge begins with animosity. Sometimes it starts with admiration. In the late 1980s, a young director named Steven Soderbergh arrived at Robert Redford's Sundance Film Festival with a little indie called Sex, Lies, and Videotape. The film exploded. It didn't just put Soderbergh on the map, it helped usher in the modern era of independent cinema. And Redford? He was there applauding, backing, even championing this rising voice. At first, the two men seemed perfectly aligned, the veteran and the prodigy. But admiration can sour quickly in Hollywood. The turning point came years later with Quiz Show, the 1994 film about one of television's biggest scandals. Soderbergh was an early champion of the project. He saw its potential and worked to get the wheels turning. But when the cameras finally rolled, it wasn't Soderbergh in the director's chair. It was Robert Redford, and that's when the friendship cracked. To Soderbergh, it looked like the mentor had stolen the spotlight. He felt muscled out of the project he had helped shape, left to watch as Redford collected the credit and acclaim. To him, it wasn't just a lost opportunity, it was betrayal. But from Redford's perspective, the accusation was insulting. Here was a man who had spent decades building a reputation on integrity, now being painted as opportunistic. In Redford's mind, he hadn't stolen anything. The film was his to direct, and he had earned the right to make it his way. The implication that he was anything less than honest cut deep. The fallout was bitter. Soderbergh saw Redford as a man who had maneuvered for power. Redford saw Soderbergh as ungrateful and unfair. The trust that once existed between them evaporated. And perhaps the saddest part? This wasn't some petty clash between egos on a film set. It was a rupture between a legendary star who wanted to nurture new talent and the very protege who once admired him. By the end, Steven Soderbergh became more than just a filmmaker in Redford's orbit. He became a reminder of how even the best intentions, mentorship, support, admiration, can twist into resentment when Hollywood pride and opportunity collide. Number 1, Arthur Lawrence. When people remember The Way We Were, 1973, they think of romance. Robert Redford and Barbra Streisand, star-crossed lovers, unforgettable chemistry, a classic love story. But behind the cameras, it wasn't romance, it was war. At the heart of that war stood Robert Redford and screenwriter Arthur Lawrence. Lawrence was no lightweight, a powerhouse writer with Broadway hits and Hollywood credits to his name. Sharp, opinionated, known for defending his words like they were sacred scripture, and Redford, an actor obsessed with detail, dialogue, character arcs, truth in every line. He wasn't afraid to speak up when something didn't feel right. You can probably guess what happened when these two forces collided. Arguments. Endless arguments. Lawrence thought Redford was undermining him. Redford thought Lawrence was inflexible, unwilling to adapt, unwilling to collaborate. At one point, things got so toxic that Lawrence was actually fired off the project. Gone. But in classic Hollywood fashion, he was later brought back, a move that only made the working environment more poisonous, and the insults, they flew freely. Lawrence didn't just dislike Redford, he despised him. He called Redford a weasel, impossible, egocentric, words that cut deep, and words he repeated even years later in interviews. Redford, on the other hand, saw Lawrence as obstructionist, too proud, too stubborn, a man who cared more about preserving his script than about making the best film possible. The result was a production dripping with tension. Every scene, every rewrite, every rehearsal became a battle of wills. Streisand felt it. Director Sidney Pollack felt it. The entire crew felt it. The set of The Way We Were was less a love story and more a battleground. And yet, here's the irony. Out of all that chaos, they created a masterpiece. The film went on to become one of the most beloved romances in cinema history. But for Redford and Lawrence, there was no happy ending, no reconciliation, just bitterness that lingered for decades. To this day, when people talk about the feuds in Redford's career, the clash with Arthur Lawrence isn't just a footnote. It's the prime example of what happens when two titans of ego, pride, and artistry go head-to-head, and neither one is willing to blink. So, was Robert Redford the problem, or did he simply demand too much in an industry full of clashing stars? What's clear is this. Even Hollywood's golden man carried grudges, and the stories behind them are just as dramatic as the movies themselves. Do you think the truth will ever come out, or will the legends stay protected forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more shocking untold stories from behind the cameras, make sure you hit subscribe and ring that bell, because the next secret we uncover might just blow your mind.